Hello, welcome to Storytime with Mr. B. Story 5, Boxer Bruno's Birthday Bash. Ellie Woozle and young Nelly Noodle, Ellie Woo and Nelly Noo for short, are my two pets. They are always finding themselves in new places, enjoying new experiences, and often creating a big mess for me, Mr. B, to tidy up. They love a little adventure and can often be found out and about or making fun at home. They'd love you to join them. Close your eyes for a moment and picture Ellie Woo and Nelly Noo in your heads now. Think of their happy smiles, their waggy tails, and let them give you a cheeky wink. Shall we read on and see what they've got themselves into this time? It was a fine winter's day. The sky was blue and the sun shone in the distance, reminding you it was there but not making things much warmer. It was the time of year when indoor activities took precedence. For Mr. B, that meant tidying up the spare room, fixing a tile in the bathroom, organising the tool shed, and other various jobs that had been forgotten in the heat of summer. For young Nelly Noo and Ellie Woo, it meant lazing by the fire, making sure their spot on the sofa stayed warm, watching the days through the window, and triple checking there were enough biscuits in case of a snowy period. 3 bags spare would probably be enough. So it was a nice change of pace when a letter dropped through the letterbox, addressed thusly.
Dear Nelly, Ellie and Mr. B, you're all invited to Boxer Bruno's birthday bash this coming Saturday. Bring yourselves and any party games you'd like to play. Party hats and a birthday lunch provided. Best regards, Boxer Bruno.
Nelly Noo and Ellie Woo were excited. Bruno's birthday bashes were a highlight of the winter. It would mean a lot of friends, lots of games, and lots of prizes, mostly in the form of small smackerels. They set about preparing immediately. They got some old newspaper and wrapped up a box of Bruno's favourite biscuits. Mr. B was careful to make sure the packet didn't accidentally tear during the process. And rather grudgingly, it has to be said, both Nelly and Ellie had a shower with some special lemon soap. Of course, this meant Mr. B also got a drenching, as they both jumped out mid-shower for a quick shake. Both Nelly Noo and Ellie Woo felt it was compulsory that if they showered, Mr. B should too. And so, the magical day rolled around and the happy trio found themselves walking up Bruno's garden path and knocking on his front door. Bruno's human answered, and as the door swung open, it was obvious the party was in full swing. There was a doggy dancing do going on in one corner, with Happy Hector howling along to a song about a hound dog. In another corner, Bouncy Bonnie and Brave Buddy were playing bones and bowls, a bit like noughts and crosses to you and me. In the conservatory, someone had set up an amazing ball pit and slide with balls of all different colours flying around the room every time someone slid down. This was doubly fun at a dog party because it meant all the balls needed fetching and putting back in the ball pit. Playful Poppy was having an amazing time over there. And the living room had been set up into a doggy obstacle course. You had to start by jumping on the sofa, running along and leap into the couch, then running or crawling, depending on doggy size, under the living room table. Finally, there was a sprint down the hall and a quick turn before sprinting back up to the start. Zoomies were all catered for at this house party, and Bruno's humans had relaxed the house rules for the day. Nelly Noo and Ellie Woo didn't know where to begin. They both ran in different directions and were greeted by their neighbourhood chums. Nelly Noo found herself racing a little white terrier called Handsome Hunter, and Ellie Woo got distracted by a ball pit ball flung over her head, and she naturally ended up in the conservatory. Mr. B headed in and placed the present and card on the table, which luckily was nice and high, as there were a lot of delicious sniffs arising from the various packages that had been put there. He then wandered to the more human-centred part of the party, where he was greeted with a lovely cup of Yorkshire tea. The morning went by, and the party pooches jumped from game to game. Guests kept on arriving, and new games kept being introduced. Some were never-ending, with the goal being to run around and play, whereas others had clear winners. At one point, Ellie Woo found herself blindfolded and being spun around while holding a pin and tail in her paw. You, dear friend, might have heard of this as Pin the Tail on the Donkey, but at this party, a life-size portrait of Bruno had been produced to become the target. However, with all the things that had needed thinking about and doing when trying to make the party run smoothly, there had been one possible hiccup that had been overlooked. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. B and the rest of the humans were standing together in the kitchen. Boxer Bruno's picture had been stuck on the counter next to the entrance to the kitchen. Now, Mr. B found himself leaning against the worktop facing the opposite way to the game of Pin the Tail on the Bruno, and discussing various human things like when to plant his garlic bulbs as the frivolities went on behind him. So he didn't see the blindfolded Ellie being spun around and then wobbling and walking towards him, arms outstretched with a pin in her right paw. "Ouch!" he yelled, jumping in the air. I bet you can guess where the pin was placed. I'll give you a clue. If it had been a game of Pin the Tail on Mr. B, Ellie would have won first prize. The rest of the participants fell about laughing as Ellie removed her blindfold and summoned up her best. "I'm sorry for sticking a pin in your face." Mr. B rolled his eyes, patted her on the head, and went to stand in a slightly less prickly part of the kitchen. Nelly knew missed all of this as she was engaged in a very widespread game of hide and seek. Dogs love this game, and once taught how to do it properly, will play with dogs and humans alike. On this occasion, the seekers were two bloodhounds who'd come from a neighbouring village. They were particularly excellent at finding, so all the hiders had to be extra sneaky. Nelly Noodle thought she had found a marvellous position. She had crawled behind a sofa and found a little flap which meant she could squeeze underneath. It was extremely tight, but Nelly knew had been on a bit of a fitness kick since the swing incident at the park several months earlier, so she slid inside and curled up in a ball. Here she had stayed for a whole 5 minutes, laying as still as possible, unlike Hunter. The bloodhounds had already been passed twice. They had found a greyhound behind the curtain and a dachshund that had rolled itself up in the carpet. They had nearly missed an Irish setter who had disguised itself as a rug before unfortunately wriggling at the wrong time. Nelly was feeling very confident, which rather sadly was her downfall. She was exceptionally pleased with herself. Can you remember what happens when a dog is very pleased? Her tail slowly started to quiver, and the quiver turned into a wiggle, and the wiggle turned into a bit of a wag. This meant that though she herself was hidden under the sofa, her tail appeared through the flap she had squeezed in through. And this is what the bloodhound saw. Can you imagine a waggy-tailed sofa? It took her a good few minutes to clamber out so she could follow on as the other various dogs and puppies were found. A few minutes later, there was just one dog still missing and needing to be found. Playful Poppy. All the other dogs were very impressed with her hiding spot when they found her, wishing they'd thought of it themselves. It was another case of a tail giving her away. The search party was passing the door to the pantry when they heard a strong thud, thud, thud. The door was closed, but luckily Mr. B was nearby. He came over, opened the pantry door, and turned on the light to find the thud, thud, thud noise was coming from Bruno's biscuit bag. There, sitting amongst a significantly reduced number of biscuits, was a substantially rounder Playful Poppy, a very satisfied look on her crumb-covered snout. She had sneaked in when a human had opened the door to fetch something earlier and couldn't believe her look when she realised where she was. Even as she was lifted out, her wagging was ecstatic. She was taken over to the Bones and Bowls corner where she took a bow and started to shake the hands of the surrounding animals. All thought it had been very well done, and the other dogs' minds started to turn towards the idea of food. Luckily, there was only another 10 minutes or so before everyone was called outside to the garden shed for the big birthday lunch. Picture this, dear readers. Each dog was asked to place their party hats or crowns back on their heads. Some even went as far as adding a bow tie to their collars. The long shed had been decked out in ribbons and bows, a long table stretched down the middle, filled with what I imagine doggies dream about when sleeping in the kitchen. There were boneless chicken drumsticks, barbecue pulled pork sandwiches, celery sticks smothered in special dog-friendly peanut butter, watermelon balls, chicken nuggets, fish fingers, a variety of biscuits with various tea mugs for dipping, and a big gravy-based birthday cake. It was a special occasion after all. There wasn't a dry mouth in the room as they all sat around wearing their party hats and waiting for everyone to be ready. All around, humans sat or stood with their doggy companions, their hands on chests or shoulders, gripping rather firmly to hold them back, as you can imagine. All doggy eyes were fixed on one tasty morsel or another. Bruno stood at the head of the table, ready to say a few very short words. He was just as hungry as the rest. It was very rare to be treated with such a feast.
Dear companions, 2 and 4 legs alike. Here's to another year of wagging tails. May food scraps always fall from the table and interesting smells be found on every walk. Tuck in.
Paws reached from everywhere. There was quite enough to go around, and everyone got a little bit, and a little bit more of everything. They chomped and chewed, guzzled and gulped, and praised Bruno for his delicious culinary cuisine. Everything was washed down with water, and as a treat, some goat's milk or bone broth. Towards the end of the meal, when all the plates were emptied and the odd little burp could occasionally be heard up and down the table, the satisfied animals were politely dismissed and allowed into the house, where it was decided by the majority that a long game of sleeping lions was required. This was, of course, a ploy. It took 10 minutes for the humans at the party to realise no one was actually checking if the dogs were moving or not. The room was full of snores and the rising and falling of content tummies. Mr. B enjoyed another 20 minutes of peace and quiet before heading back over and picking Nelly and Ellie up from the sofa. It was lucky they only lived a few houses down, as both dogs lolled their heads over his shoulders and had to be carried home to their lovely warm baskets, party hats still firmly in place. The end. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Mr. B. This has been Hunter. Today's story was written and the drawings were done by me, Mr. B. Catch you next time. Like and subscribe. See you later.